What's up, guys? It's Johnny Candido of Candido Training. And today's video is on hamstring mobility for the deadlift. And that's what you'll see is that's a theme with all of my mobility videos, is it's very task specific. And the reason being is I've seen a shift in this industry towards mobility work as being the answer to everyone's problems. And there are recommendations that aren't specific to actual problems. For example, a person like myself, I don't have any glaring issues with my technique with the main movements I'm focusing on, which is obviously the squat, bench, and deadlift. So I don't do any mobility work. I simply don't need it. Doing the movements themselves allows me to maintain the mobility that I need to hit those positions. And I do variations with a greater range of motion than the competition lifts, which also, of course, builds and maintains mobility as well. Now, I'm not saying it's going to be like that for everybody, because I know that isn't the case. There are some people who maybe need extra mobility work to feel comfortable warming up for a movement, to feel comfortable in the bottom position. And there are also, of course, people who are a little bit older, who are, let's say, maybe 45 years old. And for them, it could be different. They just may need some extra work to even just maintain mobility. However, the point is that you want to see a problem and then address it. Don't predict or create issues for yourself that aren't even there in the first place, because then you're wasting time that could be dedicated to simply strength training. Now, with that being said, I have noticed some situations where a lifter's hamstring inflexibility has negatively impacted their technique. You'll know that this is the issue if two conditions are satisfied. The first one is that you cannot get into the proper starting position. That means that your lower back is not rounding due to the weight being heavy or due to poor cueing. It's due to the fact that you simply tried to get into that position and you cannot tilt your pelvis to match your back angle. And then the second condition is the cause of this. You have to feel it that your hamstrings are being maximally stretched. If you don't feel that your hamstrings are being stretched at all, and instead it just feels like your hip structure itself is limiting your ability to get into that proper position, then it's likely an issue of morphology instead. And that needs to be addressed with a different solution. That needs to be addressed by adjusting technique and lifting style, not by increasing mobility. Something I've noticed is that a lot of people who do have hamstring flexibility as a limiting factor to their ability to use proper technique, they're used to trying to squat the deadlift up, because the lower your hips are, the less demanding this is on your hamstring flexibility. And this is, of course, why a stiff-legged deadlift requires the most amount of hamstring mobility. But as I said, even the conventional deadlift for some people is just too demanding, because your shins, while not necessarily completely vertical, need to be at least close to it. Personally, I usually recommend a slight degree of knee travel, and that's just it, just a slight degree. And the hips have to be decently high, because if your shoulders are behind the bar is simply not coming up off the floor until your shoulders are aligned over it. So that's what will typically happen, is that someone who does try to squat it down, then I'll teach them the correct position, and then it'll just be very uncomfortable, and then they may feel that their hamstrings are limiting their ability to even get into that position. Okay, so now to actually address the issue of hamstring inflexibility, I'm just going to give you a routine, and this is really just to give you an idea of what I did 2 to 3 years ago. This is actually exactly what I did, and it's not something that's set in stone. I'm not saying that this is the one right way to do things. It certainly isn't. This is just to give you an idea. And what I did is I did this after my workout, and I did this a minimum of 5 days a week. And that's crucial. The crucial thing is frequency when it comes to building up mobility. You need to get into these positions of essentially getting your body into positions it's uncomfortable being in every single day almost, because that's going to force your body to adapt. And of course, mobility work is not nearly as taxing as strength training, so there's really no reason to not do this almost every day, especially with how sedentary most people's lifestyles are. Also, I do this routine after my workouts and not beforehand. And the simple reason is that I don't want it to be a distraction to my workout. And the first part is a static stretch, which isn't generally recommended to do before your workouts, but it's simply a static stretch for your hamstrings. And personally, what I would do is I would sit on the floor and spread my legs, and then I would reach to each leg and then reach down the middle, and then I would connect my feet, and then of course just reach. Now the second part of my routine was to simply choose one dynamic stretch. And what I would typically do is a leg swing, just hold myself up against the wall to keep balance, and swing one leg at a time, and swing as high as I possibly can, and then of course just doing this for about 5 to 10 reps each set. The last step of my routine was to do a movement that pushes myself to my end range of motion, but it's also against resistance. And what I found personally to be my favorite was to do a one-legged stiff leg med ball deadlift. I know it sounds completely random, but I really enjoyed it because it forced myself to contract my hamstrings while being maximally stretched, which I find helps a bit with motor control as far as being able to find that position where your hamstrings are being stretched fully, because of course you are being forced against a slight degree of resistance the entire time, and then also being used to exerting force in that position. Because a lot of times perhaps you're increasing your mobility, but you're still not comfortable exerting force in that position where you are pushing your mobility limitations. And for this one, I preferred to do 15 rep sets, and sometimes I would toss the ball in the air, sometimes I wouldn't. And the only reason to toss the ball in the air was just to make sure that I am contracting decently hard out of that bottom position. But it's completely unnecessary, obviously. The point is to just feel that stretch and then to contract to a notable extent at least. The stiff-legged part is not meant to be taken completely literally, where you have absolutely no bend in your knee. It's just a slight knee bend, and the point is you're trying to keep your hips as high as possible, and you want your shins as vertical as possible, if not a slight negative shin angle. So that's it. Once again, I said I did this 5+ days a week, and that is the main point I want to emphasize, is that really working on mobility every single day almost is going to be critical. Alright, that's it guys. Make sure to like the video, support the channel, subscribe if you haven't already, and thanks for watching guys. Peace!
Biggie died, they shot a star. Who you know in West LA? Bring that ruckus to MA. Jeez.